Before we get into tonight's stories, I just want to take a few seconds to say thank you for being here. Unlike many horror channels, all the stories you hear on this channel are completely original, written by me. Nothing comes from Reddit, Google, or any third-party source, so every story is something new that you won't hear anywhere else. Keeping up with the writing is a lot of work, but seeing this community grow makes it completely worth it. So if you enjoy the stories and you're a fan of horror, please consider subscribing and joining us. It really helps the channel grow, and it would mean a lot to me. Now let's get into the stories. I live in what most people would describe as a rough area. Some might even go a step further and call it dangerous. They're not completely wrong. I live in a poor suburb, on the edge of a major city. Years ago, the factories closed, decent jobs disappeared, and what replaced them wasn't enough to keep families afloat. Unemployment crept in, then drugs followed. Drug dealing brought violence. Violence scared away honest businesses. And once those businesses left, the money disappeared too. Poverty has a way of feeding itself. Every year, the area seems just a little more tired than the year before. That doesn't mean it's hell. People who have never lived somewhere like this tend to imagine every street looks like a war zone. It doesn't. Kids still ride bikes. Elderly neighbors still gossip over garden fences. Families still have barbecues whenever the weather gives them half a chance. There are good people here trying to squeeze a decent life out of very little. You just learn which streets to avoid after dark. You learn not to stare too long when cars pull up beside each other with engines running. You learn that if someone says, "Mind your own business," they're usually giving you good advice. The nicest place in the whole neighborhood sits at the end of my road. Locally, everyone calls it the forest. That's being generous, really. It's only about 5 acres, maybe 6 if you count the marshy edges. But compared to the rows of brick houses surrounding it, it feels enormous. It's an ancient patch of woodland that somehow escaped development. Long before roads, estates, and shopping centers existed, the entire city must have looked like that. Somehow this tiny island of old trees survived, while everything around it disappeared beneath concrete. It separates our estate from the next one over. Most people use it as a shortcut. Dog walkers love it. Teenagers love it even more. On Friday and Saturday nights, you'd find them drinking, smoking weed, fighting like pack animals over leadership, or sneaking off behind bushes with girlfriends or boyfriends. Typical teenager stuff. For me, it was somewhere quieter. Right in the middle sat a murky pond, or bog, depending on who you asked, that somehow supported 4 ducks year-round. God knows why they'd picked that muddy puddle over all the lakes nearby. But they had. I'd been feeding them for nearly 3 years. Every evening after work, I'd walk down there with a crust of bread in my pocket. For 10 or 15 minutes, I could almost pretend I lived somewhere rural, instead of surrounded by sirens and police helicopters. That illusion lasted until last summer. It was about 7 in the evening. The sun hadn't set yet. It hung low enough to throw long shadows between the trees, but it was still bright. Birds were singing. Dogs were barking somewhere in the distance. And my 4 ducks were already waddling toward me, recognizing the idiot who brought them bread every evening. I was halfway through scattering pieces into the water when I got that feeling. You've probably had it yourself. That sudden certainty someone is watching you. I turned my head. Nothing, just trees. The feeling got stronger. Before I could properly look around, something exploded into the side of my vision. A huge man wearing a black ski mask burst out from behind an oak tree. His fist connected with my jaw before I even realized he was there. It felt like getting hit by a cricket bat. My feet left the ground. I crashed backwards into the mud, ears ringing, stars dancing across my vision. "What the?" Before I could finish, he pulled a knife. Not a little pocket knife either. A proper kitchen knife with a blade easily 8 inches long. He stood over me, breathing heavily through the mask. I genuinely thought I was about to die. I shouted something. I don't even remember what. Probably just panic spilling out. The knife lifted slightly. Then another voice echoed through the trees. "Wait!" The masked man froze. "It's not him." The second man stepped into view. Unlike the first, he wasn't hiding his face. He looked about 45, with shaved stubble, one missing front tooth that had been replaced by a gold nugget, and a thick silver chain around his neck that caught the evening sunlight. Tracksuit bottoms, designer trainers, the sort of guy you'd cross the road to avoid if you saw him outside the shops. He looked at me for a moment, then at the masked man. "Wrong dude," he repeated. The big bloke grunted. That was it. No apology, no helping me up. He simply spat into the grass about 6 inches from my head, before turning and disappearing back into the trees without saying another word. The second man sighed. "Sorry about that." He offered me a hand. I stared at it for a second before taking it. My jaw was throbbing. "I think your mate's got anger issues." He chuckled. "Jay's not really a people person, you know. He much prefers dogs." "Yeah?" I rubbed my face. "Well, maybe Jay should cool it with punching complete strangers." He smiled. "If only you knew." Something about the way he said it made me wish I hadn't spoken. He reached into his jacket pocket. For one terrifying second, I thought he was pulling out a knife again, or maybe even a gun. Instead, he produced an enormous bundle of cash wrapped in a paper bank band. More money than I'd ever held in my life. He flicked through the notes with practiced fingers. 100, 200, 3, 4, 5. He folded them and held them toward me. "For your pain and suffering." I just stared. "I can't." "You can," he said with such ease. Mistaken identity. He shrugged. "Sorry we ruined your evening walk." I looked between him and the money. Every instinct told me not to touch it. Another instinct, the one responsible for paying rent, kept staring at those 50-pound notes. Eventually, I accepted it. He nodded once. "Good man." He turned to leave. After about 10 steps, he stopped. Without looking back, he spoke. "Oh." Then he slowly glanced over his shoulder. "A bit of that's hush money too, yeah?" My stomach tightened. "You never saw us." "I wasn't planning to," I blurted out. "If you decide you did." His smile disappeared. "Jay will come and see you again." Silence. "And next time, he'll bring his dogs." He held my eyes for another couple of seconds before walking away. I stood there completely frozen. The adrenaline from the punch was starting to subside, and the pain was starting to bleed through. I could feel a lump and a click every time I breathed. Whoever Jay was, he packed a hell of a punch. I waited until I couldn't see or hear either of them anymore. I practically jogged home. That night, I locked every window despite the heat. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? The police? "Excuse me, officer. I was assaulted by two gangsters in the woods, but they gave me 500 quid afterwards." I'm sure they'd have believed every word. For days, my jaw hurt whenever I chewed. The money stayed on my kitchen table. I considered throwing it away, handing it in, burning it. Instead, after a week, I used it to replace my broken washing machine and pay off my electricity bill. Dirty money spends exactly the same as clean money. That's just an uncomfortable truth. Life slowly returned to normal. Eventually, I started walking through the forest again. Not because I'd forgotten, because I refused to let them steal the one peaceful place I had. The ducks still came over, still expecting bread, still blissfully unaware that human beings had once nearly murdered the wrong man 20 feet away. But the illusion had gone. I no longer imagined I was wandering through untouched countryside. Every snapped twig made me glance behind me. Every distant bark made my shoulders tense. Sometimes I'd notice footprints leading off the main path into thicker woodland. Sometimes cigarette butts far too fresh to have been left by teenagers. Once I even spotted tire tracks where no vehicle should have been able to drive. The forest hadn't changed. I'd simply started seeing it for what it really was. It belonged to the area just as much as the tower blocks did. Nature doesn't erase crime. Sometimes it hides it. About 3 months later, I saw the silver chain guy again. Only briefly. I was buying milk from the corner shop when a black SUV rolled past. He was sitting in the passenger seat. He looked straight at me. For one horrible second, I thought he was going to stop. Instead, he gave me a tiny nod. Not friendly, not threatening, just acknowledgement. As if to remind me that he remembered. Then the SUV kept driving. I've never seen Jay again. At least I don't think I have. Maybe I pass him every week without recognizing him. Maybe he walks the same paths I do. Maybe he watches from somewhere in those trees. Who knows? I still feed the ducks. They're older now. I swear one of them limps slightly. Every evening, they still paddle over expecting dinner. Watching them helps me pretend everything is normal. Most days it even works, until I catch myself looking toward the trees. Until I remember the fist, the knife, the words. "It's not him." Those 3 words have haunted me more than the punch ever did. Because if I had been him, there wouldn't have been any apology, no helping hand, no 500 pounds, and no warning, just a shallow grave somewhere beneath those ancient trees where nobody ever thinks to look. And sometimes, standing beside that little pond, I wonder about the man they were actually waiting for. Did he ever walk into that forest? Did he realize people were hunting him? Did he escape? Or is there someone else's family, somewhere in this city, still wondering why their son, brother, or dad simply vanished one summer evening after taking what should have been an ordinary walk? I hope he got away. I really do. Because every now and then, when the wind dies completely and the forest falls silent, I find myself thinking about something else the Silver Chain Man said. Not the threat, not the hush money, the other part. Jay's not a people person. No, and I don't think he was. I think Jay was exactly the sort of person who preferred that people never came back out of those woods at all. I've been a psychiatrist for almost 25 years. It's more than a job to me. It's my vocation. I'd even go as far as to say it's my calling. Even now, after all this time, I make sure I stay current with every major paper, clinical trial, diagnostic revision, and therapeutic technique that comes out. Mental health is one of those fields where knowledge ages quickly. If you stop learning, you stop helping. A psychiatrist who thinks he already knows everything is one of the most dangerous people you could ever meet. I got lucky early in my career. Fresh out of specialist training, I managed to establish a private practice in one of the wealthiest parts of London. Through a combination of timing, reputation, and word of mouth, my client list exploded. Politicians, celebrities, hedge fund managers, old money, new money, you name it, they walk through my doors. Financially, it was extraordinary. If I never earned another penny, I'd still live comfortably for the rest of my life. The money was wonderful. The work wasn't. I'd entered psychiatry because I genuinely wanted to help people who were suffering. Instead, I became a very expensive human sounding board. One appointment would be a socialite explaining that her anxiety was unbearable because she was hosting the first gala of the season. The next would be her husband confessing he couldn't stop fantasizing about the au pair. Someone else was devastated because their holiday villa in Tuscany needed extensive renovations. Every day, I'd nod sympathetically, prescribe another SSRI, recommend therapy, collect an eye-watering check, and move on to the next patient. Yes, they were real problems to them, but I never felt like I was changing lives. 4 years ago, I finally admitted to myself that I hated what my career had become. So I sold the practice. My accountant thought I'd lost my mind. I took what amounted to an enormous pay cut and accepted a position as the resident psychiatrist at an NHS secure mental health facility. It remains one of the best decisions I've ever made. The work became infinitely harder overnight. Violent patients, complex trauma, treatment-resistant illnesses, schizophrenia, psychosis, severe depression. People who genuinely needed help. For the first time in years, I felt useful again. That's where I met John, 44 years old, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia nearly 15 years earlier. Multiple admissions, multiple failed treatment plans. His notes were thicker than some textbooks. The first 5 sessions were almost entirely silent. I'd sit opposite him while he stared through the window behind me. Sometimes he'd blink. Sometimes he'd smile at something over my shoulder. But he never spoke. On our 6th appointment, he suddenly looked directly into my eyes. "I'm not mad, Doc." His voice was surprisingly calm. "I'm cursed." I smiled professionally. "I know that's how it feels." "No," he interrupted. "You're not listening." "I don't have schizophrenia. I can see them." "The others." I let him continue. "They're from somewhere else. Another dimension. Their world's dying. They figured out ours exists. And they want it." Every psychiatrist develops a habit of separating the emotion from the content. You don't judge the belief. You examine how firmly it's held, whether it's internally consistent, whether it causes distress. John's belief system was remarkably elaborate. He claimed these beings had been visiting him since childhood. They supposedly appeared differently each time. Some looked almost human. Others didn't. He described creatures with dozens of eyes, people whose faces opened vertically, children with backwards knees, things that cast shadows in the wrong direction. I noted every detail. Classic persecutory delusions, visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, schizophrenia. Then he handed me a folder. Inside were hundreds of drawings. Now, patients with psychosis often produce artwork. I've seen plenty over the years, but these, they disturbed me. Not because they were frightening, because they were unbelievably consistent. Every drawing, regardless of age, showed the same impossible anatomy, the same symbols, the same strange doorway shape, the same enormous hands. He hadn't contradicted himself once in over 20 years of sketches. "I don't draw from imagination," John whispered. "I draw what they let me remember." Again, I wrote my notes. Then he rolled up his sleeve. "I've never shown anyone this." Across his upper arm sat an enormous scar. At first glance, it resembled a severe burn, but looking closer, it looked like a handprint. Not metaphorically, literally. 5 enormous fingers had sunk into the flesh. Each fingertip had left deep circular scars. The thumb alone reached almost to his shoulder. The spacing was impossible. Whatever made it would have required a hand nearly twice the size of a man's. "When I was 28, John said quietly, "one of them almost pulled me through." I asked if he'd ever considered how he'd received the injury. He nodded. "Yes." "You'll write down that I burned myself." I said nothing. "You'll say I imagined the hand." He smiled sadly. They always do. Weeks became months. Medication reduced some of his agitation. But his story never changed. Not once. He never embellished it. Never contradicted himself. Never tried convincing other patients. He only ever discussed it with me. Oddly, I started looking forward to our sessions. Not because I believed him. Because his conviction fascinated me. Then came the night everything changed. It was just after 2 in the morning when my phone rang. Night staff. They sounded terrified. "Doctor, I think you need to come." I arrived 15 minutes later. The entire ward was in chaos. Police were already outside. John's room had been sealed. The senior nurse met me at the door. Her face was completely white. "I've never seen anything like it." According to 3 separate staff members, they'd heard John screaming. Not screaming in fear, screaming in agony. They described another sound too. A deep, humming vibration, like industrial machinery. The lights throughout the ward flickered. Security cameras failed simultaneously. The disturbance lasted less than 20 seconds. When staff forced open John's door, he was gone. The window remained locked. The door had been locked from outside. No ceiling access, no hidden passages, nothing. But something else occupied the center of the room. Burned into the brick wall was an outline, roughly 7 feet tall, perfectly rectangular, like a doorway. The bricks inside the outline had turned black. Not soot, not smoke damage. The surface itself had changed color, almost melted. Forensic investigators later admitted they'd never encountered anything quite like it. Then someone noticed the floor. 3 fingers, index, middle, ring. Still wearing the hospital identification band around one. Each ended in a perfectly smooth black surface. There were no ragged edges, no crushing, no tearing. The bone looked sealed, like something unimaginably hot had sliced through them in a fraction of a second. There wasn't much blood. Far less than there should have been. The police concluded John had somehow escaped. Management agreed. Officially, that's still the explanation. Unofficially, no officer ever explained how a 44-year-old psychiatric patient escaped a locked room without opening either the door or window, or why he apparently left 3 fingers behind. The room was renovated, the wall replaced, the investigation closed. Life moved on. Mostly. 3 months later, I finally looked through John's artwork again. I hadn't been able to bring myself to before. Near the back was one drawing I'd somehow overlooked. It showed a tall, rectangular doorway. Standing beside it was a man missing 3 fingers. Below the picture, he'd written only one sentence. The third time they come, don't try to hold on to this side. It only hurts more. I felt something cold settle into my stomach. Because John had drawn that picture 8 years before he disappeared. I still don't know what happened in that room. Every rational part of my mind insists John suffered from severe schizophrenia and somehow engineered an impossible escape. That's the explanation I tell colleagues. That's the explanation I tell myself. After all, psychiatrists deal in evidence, not ghosts, not curses, not alternate dimensions. But every now and then, usually late in the evening when everyone else has gone home, I find myself standing outside what used to be John's room. The new bricks have already begun to age, except for one section, a rectangle, slightly darker than the rest, probably nothing, almost certainly nothing. And yet, sometimes, if I stand there long enough, I swear I can hear someone knocking from the other side. 3 slow knocks, always 3, as though someone is asking to be let back in. Or perhaps something else is asking to be let out.
Let me know what you thought of tonight's story, and subscribe to the channel, and you'll get the best original horror twice a week. Check out some of our other videos on screen now. Thanks for watching. Good night, and sweet nightmares.